Hello and welcome to the Autocar show. Now the sub 4 meter, very popular segment in India and of late was gathering storm is the compact SUVs. Of course the most popular one being the Ford EcoSport, but it now has a new competitor. The Fiat Avventura is the new entrant into this segment, and today we're pitting it against the most popular one, the Ford EcoSport. The Avventura is basically a beefed up Punto Evo when you look at it, with most of the changes in the tail section. The highlight of this design is a spare wheel which has been mounted onto the tailgate in quite a unique manner. The pumped up look continues in the front with a new bumper and a tough looking cladding along with a skid plate to accentuate the SUV look. The point to note is that it sits 20mm higher off the ground than the Punto Evo, giving it a ground clearance of 205mm. Now this is as high as a duster, making it more practical and probably more SUV than other crossovers like the Polo Cross or the Etios Cross. But even though it sits high off the ground and looks right from all angles, there's no getting away from the fact that it still looks more crossover than SUV, especially when you look at it beside the EcoSport. Now the EcoSport actually sits lower to the ground, but it doesn't look like that. It looks every bit the SUV. The open-mouthed look with the large grille, the tall stance and the skid plates all add to its appeal. The rear has the look of a wraparound windscreen, and of course there's the tail-mounted spare wheel. Standing side by side, especially when viewed from front, the Avventura looks like a shy smiling girl, whilst the EcoSport looks like the big bad boy with loads of attitude. So the interiors from the new Punto, they look more modern, quality is nicer. Still, a lot of things on the inside that I don't like. For one, there's too many colors and textures happening on the inside. There's grey leather, there's dark grey, light grey, brown, black. It's a lot of mix and match. There's also a grey leather look strip across the dash which lifts the appearance, but the material isn't the best and lands up looking like cheap Rexine. The 3 dials here, interesting stuff. It's got a compass, it's got a tilt angle sensor, it's got an approach angle sensor, and they look quite nice when the car's on and they're lit up, but when the car's off, they look almost like stickers. So quality is a bit inconsistent and storage isn't as good as it is in the EcoSport. As far as equipment goes, save for an added boot release button, everything else is the same as the top spec Punto. So you get climate control, electric windows, a rear AC vent and an audio system that supports CD, MP3 and aux-in. Unfortunately, while the Blue & Me Bluetooth interface works great with voice commands and telephony, it still doesn't support audio streaming. The EcoSport absolutely trumps the Avventura in terms of equipment. Over and above the climate control, Bluetooth telephony, voice dialing and USB aux radio that both have in common, the EcoSport pampers you with voice recognition for artists and songs on your iPod. The iPod integration is a lot nicer too. Parking sensors are also available, and most importantly, the Bluetooth audio, which is a surprising omission in the Avventura. Apart from this, Ford's Sync system can dial emergency services from your paired phone and inform them of your location via GPS if it detects an accident. The only major advantage the Fiat has over the Ford in this department is that it features rear AC vents. That's about it. The EcoSport's interiors are also not really the best quality of plastics, and the central console has a host of buttons which can be quite confusing as well. Still, it scores on practicality with lots of storage spaces, and once you're driving, the differences in the cars are instantly noticeable. Now, when you get into the Avventura and drive it, it's not going to be easy to find a comfortable driving position. Where do I begin? The seat squab is a bit too long, so I find I have to sit more forward than I would normally sit, which means I find the steering too close to me. The steering is too far out. Also, it feels too high even though I'm sitting in the highest of position. At the lowest setting, it still feels quite high. The pedals also feel high. So frankly, everything feels a bit off. The EcoSport, on the other hand, lets you settle in much easier. Now when you get into the EcoSport, the seating position is nice and high. So you really get that feeling of being in an SUV. You get that feeling of dominance on the road. Visibility is good. The only thing that hampers visibility actually is this A-pillar, which you sometimes have to lean over at intersections or around corners. Ergonomically, everything is good. Everything falls to hand easily. It's easy to get your driving position, and this front seat is supremely comfortable. Overall, the EcoSport is the one that feels nicer and more comfortable from behind the wheel. Under the hood, the Avventura comes with the 1.3-litre diesel motor from the Linea and the Punto Evo Sport, making the same 92 bhp. Whilst the EcoSport has a larger capacity 1.5-litre engine, but it produces a lower 90 bhp. The EcoSport's engine is the bigger one, and it does feel like that out on the road. It feels more responsive. It has a nice linear acceleration and barely any lag, so whether you're pottering around in the city or cruising out on the highway, you will be comfortable and happy in the EcoSport. Drop below the 2000 mark and you do notice a small amount of lag, but there's always enough power to keep going. It's only when you want to get an urgent move on that you'll need to change the gears. But if you're gentle on the throttle, the EcoSport is really happy to slowly build up power again. There's no surge of power, so it's not that it feels peppy, but it's always more than adequate. Now that's much better than the Avventura, which feels really dull below the 2000 RPM mark. Lag is very noticeable, and more often than not you find yourself reaching for the gear shift in the Avventura to come down the range and extract more power. Particularly in traffic conditions, you have to give the Avventura's gearbox a good workout. But it's not the best gearbox to do that with. The Ford's gear shift with its short throw and positive shift feels much better. The difference in power between the two cars is actually accentuated on a hilly section of road. Where the EcoSport is happy to clamber up, the Avventura makes you shift into first and floor the pedal to actually get up the slope. The performance of the Avventura improves on an open stretch of road. Once you get into the meat of the power band and settle into a cruise, driving is much easier. But there's no doubt that in the comparisons of the engine, it's the EcoSport that has the distinct advantage. Where the Avventura comes into its own is around the corners. Now on paper, the Avventura has more ground clearance than the EcoSport. But out on the road, it feels much closer to the ground and feels very car-like to drive. In fact, on a winding section of road, it has loads of grip around the corners. It feels composed, it feels collected, and it always inspires confidence. The steering too has this lovely mechanical feel to it and points the car exactly where you want it to go. The only thing that lets it down a bit is the steering that feels inconsistent around a series of bends. You need to keep varying the input, and that is sometimes a bit disconcerting. In comparison, the EcoSport steering feels much better. The EcoSport steering is much lighter than the Avventura, so tackling parking situations or city traffic will be much easier in this. But it weighs up equally well around the corners, and even though this car is more top heavy and has more roll than the Avventura, it's still got good levels of grip around the corners, and I'm never feeling insecure. And overall, compared to the Avventura, the EcoSport just feels more compact, nimble and maneuverable when you drive it. In fact, we always like the handling of the EcoSport and it still feels good, but the Avventura feels better. The Avventura also scores on ride quality. Well, what's really great here is the ride quality, especially over particularly bad sections of road like this. You feel that this has that pliancy to the ride that's missing in the EcoSport. It just doesn't let the sharper bumps and potholes filter through to the passenger, so it's a very comfortable place to be. It's flat, it's composed, and even the suspension works far more silently than in the EcoSport. The only problem is that there's a lot more road noise that filters through here. The EcoSport, on the other hand, does have a firmer edge to the ride and it does roll a bit more, so the side-to-side movement over a bad section of road gets accentuated in the rear seat. Still, it's not drastic enough to make it uncomfortable, and for all practical purposes, without comparison, the ride of the EcoSport is quite good, and it does have more room in the back seat too. The EcoSport not exactly spacious at the back, but there is more legroom and more headroom here than the Avventura. The window line is quite high and you can feel a little hemmed in at the back of the EcoSport, but on the whole it's the more comfortable and spacious back seat. In comparison, the Avventura has much less legroom. So that's really the two cars out on the road. Now earlier I had talked about the stylish spare wheel on the Avventura, but as we were packing up I realized how impractical it really is. Now opening and closing the boot of the Avventura is quite an exercise. Imagine that with a load of bags in your hand. First you have to release it, then you have to keep this button pressed, which is quite hard, to open out the tire, and then you open the hatch. So if I had bags in my hand, truly this is most impractical. Of course, when you close it, I find that, there you go, I forgot that button. You have to press that button. And this feels a little flimsy. The EcoSport's boot is easier to access and to store things in. It's also more spacious with the 362 litres of space. Well, let's sum this comparison up. Let's take the Avventura. It's a nice looking car, but that's just it. It looks more like a car than an SUV. Its other qualities are its ride, its handling, but then the negatives really are the engine, which feels short on power, and the ergonomics, which are not really great. Now coming to the EcoSport, it definitely has more attitude. It feels more SUV-like, whether you look at it from the outside or whether you're sitting behind the wheel. It's got a good ride and handling package. The engine is nice and drivable. The ergonomics feel great. There's more room in the back seat, and overall, it really is the one that you want to go out and buy. And of course, we think it's still the best sub 4 meter SUV that there is around.